Where does the signal become an action? That question will tell you whether the idea is ready to use, needs a pilot, or belongs in the research pile for now.
From signal to action.
You are listening to the Innovation Forge, the #1 podcast on adaptive enrollment management, exploring the data, marketing, and strategy that fuels higher education. Here's your host, David Dysart.
There's a moment in almost every Slate shop where someone looks at a student record and says, this student is clearly interested. And then the harder question arrives. Interested enough for what? That's where the work gets real. Not whether Slate can collect signals. Spoiler, it can. Not whether portals, forums, events, deliver, ping, source formats, vendor platforms, and interactions can create a lot of behavioral data. They absolutely can. The harder question is whether the institution knows when a signal becomes actionable. A click is not a strategy. A score is not personalization. A model is not permission. And a dashboard is not a handoff. A useful signal needs an action policy. It needs to answer what the behavior probably means, how confident we are, and who is allowed to act on it. Well, what action is appropriate even, and what should be suppressed, and how will we know if the action helped? That is the Forge work. The raw material is student behavior. The finished tool is not the dashboard. The finished tool is a disciplined decision rule that staff can use without guessing. Today's episode is about moving from signal to action. The central question really is, when does engagement or behavioral data become actionable enough to change outreach? I'm drawing mainly from 4 Slate Summit sessions. The first is Student Signals, Stranger Things, and the Path to Personalized Outreach, presented by Moni, Ben from College of Holy Cross, and Courtney and Katy from ZeeMee. The second is from Insights to Action, using behavioral data to power targeted campaigns, by Amy and Amanda from Rogers Williams University, undergraduate admissions, and Megan from Capture Higher Ed. The third is All the Small Clicks, conversion rate optimization lessons from ads to applications, presented by Lily, Michael, and Lana from University of Georgia, undergraduate admissions. And the fourth is Adapting to Yield Volatility, using data and technology to shape the right class, with Katy, Christy from Alfred University, Olivia from University of Pacific, and Ali from the University of Tulsa. Together, these sessions point to a clear pattern. Slate teams are moving from reporting what happened to deciding what should happen next. And that's a major shift, and it requires more than technical skill. It requires judgment. Welcome to the Conference Insight Engine, presented by the Innovation Forge. I'm David Dysart, and this series is about turning summit material into interpretation and application. This episode sits right in the middle of where advanced Slate work is going. Over and over again, the Slate Summit sessions pointed towards the same pressure. Institutions have more behavioral data than they used to, but they do not always have stronger operating discipline around that data. And that distinction matters. A student sends an email. That's a signal. A student visits a financial aid page 3 times. That is a signal. A student registers for an admitted student event and no-shows. That's also a signal. A parent clicks the scholarship content. That may be a signal. A student joins a community platform, logs into the portal repeatedly, stops their form, abandons it, returns 2 days later, and then disappears again. That is a set of signals. But none of that tells you automatically what to do. That's where institutions get stuck. They collect more fields, build more tabs, add more dashboards, and then just assume action will follow. Usually, it does not. The counselor still has to interpret the record, the communications team still has to decide which campaign fits, the events team still has to decide whether another reminder helps or just adds noise. Leadership still has to decide whether a segment is truly at risk or merely quiet. If those decisions are not defined, the institution has not built a signal system, it's just built signal clutter. My synthesis from these sessions is that the next level of Slate maturity is not we have more behavioral data. The next level is we have governed behavioral data that leads to defined, proportionate, measurable action. The word proportionate is really doing a lot of work there. Not every signal deserves an intervention. Some signals deserve a lighter touch. Some deserve a different channel. Some deserve suppression. Some deserve no action until they repeat, or maybe just combine with another signal. That's one of the most useful takeaways from the Holy Cross and ZeeMee session. Their presentation shows a clear signal-to-action pattern across websites, events, portals, forums, email, and ZeeMee. But the important part is not just the collection of signals. It's the movement from signal definition to Slate structure to activation through portals, campaigns, notifications, counselor queries, and even leadership views. That is the architecture. Define the signal, structure it, decide how it may be used. And the third step is where many institutions need more discipline. If one signal can affect a portal, an email, a counselor notification, and a leadership dashboard, then the institution has to decide which uses are appropriate. A student who shows strong community engagement may be a good candidate for a student life message. But should that same signal affect counselor prioritization? Should it influence scholarship outreach? Should it appear in a leadership yield view? Should it be visible even to every user? Should it expire after 30 days? Those are not technical questions. They are an operating model question series. And that is the theme I keep coming back to in this series. Slate can do the thing. The more important question is whether the institution has decided how the thing should be used. The Roger Williams and Capture session gives us the operational version of this problem. Their presentation describes a two-way data exchange. Slate sends data out through daily queries and SFTP. Behavioral fields and model outputs come back through source formats. And then that data becomes visible through record tabs, popovers, reports, query filters, counselor workflows, and even campaign actions. That is practical machinery. It's also where the governance burden increases. Roger Williams separates apply, yield, and anti-melt use cases. That distinction is important because the same behavior can mean different things at different funnel stages. Before the application, a signal might suggest readiness to apply. After admission, it might suggest yield interest, uncertainty, or even price sensitivity. After deposit, it might just suggest onboarding friction or melt risk. If you use one generic engagement score across every stage, you flatten those differences. That's one of my strongest recommendations from this episode. Do not build one master score and pretend it answers every question. Build signal indices around decisions. An application generation signal should answer who needs help moving from interest to application. A yield signal should answer who is showing signs of commitment, comparison, hesitation, or price concern. And the anti-melt signal should answer who is deposited but may be stuck, delayed, or drifting. Those are different questions. They need different inputs, thresholds, actions, owners, and success measures. This connects directly to the work I've been calling signal indices. And I think I'll go over that in another section, but I think play is really interesting here. And the University of Georgia session adds another layer that I think is easy to understand. Signal quality starts with experience design. Their session is about conversion rate optimization from ads to application. They discuss portals and forms as advertising collateral, tracking through tools like GTM, go-to-market, platform pixels, Slate paying, UTM tracking, common app drifts, and reporting that follows students through RFI activity through application deposit. The technical pieces are useful, but the deeper lesson is that if the front-end journey is messy, the back-end signal will be messy. If a landing page has too many calls to action, a click tells you less. If an RFI form asks for too much too soon, abandonment may mean frustration rather than lack of interest. If metadata is inconsistent, attribution weakens. If mobile layout is poor, behavior may reflect design failure instead of student intent. So conversion rate optimization and signal strategy should not be separate work. Every form field is a future data point. Every call to action is a future interpretation problem. Every tracking parameter is a future reporting dependency. Every portal decision changes what behavior means. If you want better engagement scoring, do not start only with the scoring formula. Start with the behavior environment. Make the path cleaner. Make the choice clearer. Make the data just more consistent. Then score the signal. The yield volatility session gives the strategic reason why this matters. Katy, Christy, Olivia, and Allie are working from a market reality where application behavior, MELT, financial aid, demographics, competition, and student expectations are all shifting. In that environment, application volume is not enough. Institutions need measured precision. The phrase is mine, but it captures the direction of the session. The panel points towards staged direct admission, market groups, campus integrations, financial aid, and housing signals, personalized admitted student portals, and AI-assisted analysis of intent and MELT profiles. What stands out is the movement from admissions as a one-time decision to admission as an ongoing signal environment. A student's not simply admitted and left alone. At least, I hope. The institution watches for signals of commitment, hesitation, friction, readiness, and risk. But watching's not enough. If a student has not completed housing, who acts? If a student has aid questions, what message is sent? If a student has high portal activity but no deposit, does that suggest interest or confusion? If a student appears at risk for MELT, is the next action from admissions, financial aid, student affairs, or the academic college? Without ownership, the signal sits there. In my experience, this is one of the most common failures in advanced Slate work. The institution creates a good report, and the report becomes another place where responsibility is vague. A dashboard is not an owner. A query is not an owner. A score is not an owner. If the action requires a human decision, name the human role. If the action is automated, name the team responsible for the automation. And if the action crosses offices, name the handoff. This is especially important because the funnel has become too complex for simple, stage-based messaging. Inquiry, applicant, admit, and deposit still matter, but they do not explain enough. Two admitted students may both be admits. One has visited campus twice, clicked financial aid content, opened housing information, logged into the portal 3 times this week. Another has not opened anything in a month. A third has parent engagement, but little student engagement. A fourth is highly active only around scholarship content. A fifth has deposited, but has not completed onboarding steps. Those students should not all receive the same outreach. They also should not be thrown into a chaotic personalization engine where every click triggers a message. The right answer is governed differentiation. Different enough to be useful, governed enough to be trusted. The framework I would use is a signal to action matrix. I would not make it complicated. For every active signal or signal combination, define the observed behavior, the possible interpretation, the confidence level, the allowed action, the owner, the timing and channel, the suppressions, and the measurement plan. That may sound like a lot, but it is really one sentence. When this happens, we believe it may mean this, so the owner may take this action through this channel within this time frame, unless these suppressions apply, and we will judge success by this measure. And you can go see the ForgeWorks Grimoire 4th training to get a bit more information on this. If you cannot finish that sentence, the signal is not ready to drive outreach. It may belong in research. It may belong in a dashboard. It may be useful for staff awareness, but it's not ready to change student treatment. And that's the difference between a signal and a policy. Now, let's talk about the danger zone. The first danger is treating engagement as intent. Engagement and intent overlap, but they're not the same. A student can be highly engaged because they're excited. They can also be highly engaged because they're confused, anxious, price sensitive, or comparison shopping. A quiet student may be disengaged, and maybe they've already committed. Parent engagement may be meaningful, but it's not the same as student engagement. Behavior is evidence, and it's not a confession. That means the language we use internally matters. I would be careful with labels like hot, cold, likely to enroll, or not interested, unless the model behind them is strong and the action is governed. I prefer labels that describe the behavior itself: recent financial aid engagement, high admitted student portal activity, event engaged and deposit incomplete, parent engagement present with limited student engagement. Those labels are less dramatic, but also safer and more useful. The second danger is crossing the creepy line. The Holy Cross in ZeeMee session directly raises student expectations and data transparency. I would treat any specific survey number cautiously unless the methodology is available. But the principle is sound. Personalization is easier to trust when it connects to something the student knowingly did. You registered for our engineering webinar, so here are related resources. It feels normal. We notice you've been looking at scholarship content late at night. Feels different. The test I use is simple. Can a staff member explain the outreach to a student in one sentence without sounding strange? If yes, the signal may be usable. If no, rewrite the action and don't use the signal. The third danger is false precision. Scores are seductive because they compress messy behavior into a number. But a student with an engagement score of 82 does not necessarily deserve different treatment from a student with a 78, unless the threshold itself is meaningful. If the threshold is arbitrary, say so. Treat it as a pilot. If the score is a ranking tool, do not pretend it is prediction. If the model is vendor provided, do not assume the label means what your staff thinks it means. That's why I like focused indices more than one master score. A financial aid concern index is interpretable. A campus visit engagement index is interpretable. A deposit readiness index can be made interpretable. A broad student interest score may be harder to defend unless it is carefully documented. A fourth danger is message fatigue. If every team acts on every signal, students get hammered. A financial aid signal triggers one message, an event signal triggers another, a portal signal triggers another, a counselor query triggers another, a vendor segment triggers a campaign. Suddenly, the institution has personalized itself into noise. Sometimes the best action is not more communication. Sometimes the best action is better sequencing, portal content, counselor context, or suppression. A fifth danger is weak evaluation. A signal action needs a success measure beyond opens and clicks. For application generation, the measure may be application start, submission, or completion. For yield, it may be event attendance, aid appointment completion, deposit, portal checklist progress. For anti-melt, it may be housing completion, orientation registration, financial clearance, or reduced melt. Click rate is not an enrollment strategy. Georgia's CRO session is useful here because it connects upstream behavior with downstream application and deposit reporting. That's the discipline. Do not stop at the click if the goal is conversion. Now, let's make this practical. Suppose you are building a deposit campaign around a key date. The blunt segment is admitted, not deposited. This is a starting point, but it's not enough. A signal-informed approach would separate the population into action groups. One group might be high activity, deposit incomplete. Those students may need clarity, reassurance, or a final nudge. Another group might be financial aid engaged, deposit incomplete. They may need more cost clarity or an aid appointment. Another might be event engaged, but still undecided. They may need a follow-up tied to what they attended. Another might be portal quiet and email quiet, where the right move may be a different channel, counselor review, or just lower priority in your list. Another might show parent engagement but limited student engagement, which should not be treated as if the student personally clicked everything. The point is not to create endless segments. The point is to create useful action groups. Each group should have an owner, a message strategy, a suppression rule, and a success measure. That's what I mean by allowed action. The signal does not merely describe the student, it routes the next move. For a funnel insights engine, this is where reporting becomes operational. A basic funnel dashboard shows counts by stage. A more mature engine shows which stage-specific behaviors are changing, what action groups are growing, which interventions are active, and whether those interventions are improving movement. Not just admitted students, not deposited. Admitted high event engagement, no deposit. Admitted financial aid engagement, no deposit. Admitted parent engagement only. Admitted high portal activity, no event registration. Deposited missing onboarding steps. Each group has a different owner and a different action. That is the shift from descriptive analytics to adaptive enrollment management. If I were advising a Slate team to start with this work, I would not tell them to build a giant engagement model first. I would tell them to pick one decision. Which admitted students should receive a counselor follow-up this week? Which non-deposit admitted students need financial aid clarification? Which application starters should receive completion support? Which deposited students are showing signs of onboarding friction? Pick one, then build a signal to action matrix for that decision. Start with the behaviors you can observe reliably in Slate. Events, forms, portal activity, deliver, engagement, interactions, checklist items, application status, deposit status, source data, ping, vendor fields, if integrated. Separate the behavior from the interpretation. Define the threshold, choose an allowed action, assign the owner, write the suppressions, measure the outcomes. Now, this is slower than saying, let's score everything, but it produces work people can actually use. It also makes training easier. If a counselor understands a weekly list, if the logic is clear, these students are admitted, not deposited, have recent meaningful engagement, have no counsel interaction in the last 7 days, and recommended action is a short, fit-focused follow-up. Do not mention tracking behavior, log the interaction, suppress if the student deposits or opts out. That's teachable. Compare that with call students with high engagement scores. That's just not enough. High compared to what? Based on what? For what purpose? With what message? How often? Who owns it? What if the parent caused the engagement? What if the student is high engagement but already told us they're not enrolling? This is where Slate teams have to raise the standard. A score is not an introduction. A query is not a strategy. And a dashboard is not a handoff. Staff enablement has to be part of the build. Counselors need to know what a signal means and what it does not mean. Communication staff need to know which signals can change message logic and which should only inform reporting. Operations staff need to know how signals are sourced, refreshed, matched, expired, and audited. Leadership needs to know what claims can and cannot be made from the data. If a counselor sees high engagement, they should not have to guess whether that means email clicks, portal activity, event attendance, vendor behavior, or all of the above. If leadership sees high yield potential, they should know whether that is a validated model, a rules-based index, or an experimental segment. This is documentation work, but it's also trust work. A signal system that staff do not understand will either be ignored or misused. The same standard applies to AI. The yield volatility session points towards AI-assisted analysis of intent and melt profiles, and many institutions will experiment there. But AI-generated insight is not an allowed action by itself. It may suggest a pattern, summarize behavior, or help staff notice a segment. Before it changes outreach, someone still needs to define the action policy. What data did the AI use? What is the recommended action? Who reviews it? Can staff explain it? Can the student-facing message stand on its own? How will we know if it helped? AI does not remove governance. It increases the need for it. Public conference sessions are usually best treated as patterns, not proof. A pattern says, here is a promising way to structure the work. Local implementation asks, does this work here for our students with our data under our constraints towards our goal? And that's the correct posture. So if you want to apply this episode this week, start small. Pick one decision where behavioral data should improve action. List the signals you already have, separate behavior from interpretation, define one allowed action, assign an owner, write suppressions, define a success measure, and schedule a review date. If your team is more mature, create a signal ledger. Every active signal used in outreach, reporting, scoring, routing, or personalization should have a source, a definition, refresh schedule, owner, allowed uses, suppressions, and retirement conditions. That ledger becomes the backbone of communications governance and adaptive enrollment management. Without it, signal logic spreads across queries, rules, exports, portals, delivery campaigns, source formats, and dashboards until nobody can see the whole system. And with it, the institution can actually govern what it built. The summit showed institutions moving toward more sophisticated use of behavior, personalization, attribution, and yield intelligence. And that's the right direction. But the next question is not, how much can we know? The better question is, what are we allowed to do with what we know? And the question is harder. It's also more useful though. And the goal is not to build a surveillance machine. The goal is to build a better enrollment operation. One that notices when a student needs help, one that reduces friction, one that respects student expectations, and one that gives staff clear priorities. It has to turn data into action without turning action into noise. So, my recommendation is for every signal you want to use, finish the sentence. When this happens, we believe it may mean this, so the owner may take this action through this channel within this time frame unless these suppressions apply. and we will judge success by this measure. If you cannot finish that sentence, the signal is not ready to drive outreach. It may be interesting, it may belong in research, it may belong in a dashboard, but it is not ready to change student treatment. That's the difference between raw ore and a forged tool. For listeners who want to go deeper, start with the Holy Cross and ZeeMee session on student signals and personalized outreach. Pair it with the Roger Williams and Capture session on behavioral data and targeted campaigns. Then study Georgia's session on conversion rate optimization to understand how the student experience creates or distorts the signals you later analyze. Finally, use the yield volatility panel to keep the strategic context in view. If you're working through the Slate Summit decks yourself, examine these sessions with one question in mind. Where does the signal become an action? That question will tell you whether the idea is ready to use, needs a pilot, or belongs in the research pile for now. And if you are building this inside your own Slate instance, start with one signal, one decision, one owner, one action, and one measurement. That's enough to begin. Thanks for listening to the Conference Insight Engine presented by the Innovation Forge. Now, go find one signal in your instance and write that action policy before it writes one for you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please grow the guild by rating and reviewing the Innovation Forge podcast or sharing it with a colleague who needs to hear about these creative crossovers in education. The best review or comment every month will get an ebook of my book, of course. Particularly great ones will also be featured on future episodes. Thank you so much for joining me in the workshop today. Remember to strike true, and let's forge something extraordinary together.
A click in the dark, a login at night, a name on a list with a pulse of light. We saw the spark, we felt the reaction, now build a road from signal to action. Everybody says the student looks alive. They opened every message, they came back 5 times. They found the 8-page, they watched the door, they started the form, then disappeared once more. A signal is a clue, it is never the whole truth, so don't make the score say more than it can prove. Who owns the next step? What channel do we choose? What do we hold back? What do we measure down? From signal to action, from heat into steel. Tell me what it means, tell me what is real. From signal to action, no guessing in the glow. If the data says move, then the policy should know. When this happens, we believe it means that. So this owner takes this action, then we measure the path. A dashboard is not a handoff, a score is not a plan. A query cannot carry what belongs in human hands. One student is ready, one student needs aid, one student is anxious, one student just strayed. So split up the silence by stage and by need. Application yield and melt all ask different things. Who owns the next step? What message is fair? What should be suppressed? forge the rules.